Welcome my dudes, this is Koazli speaking, and welcome to part 6 of 9 videos showing you the differences between the Atari ST version and MS-DOS version of The Simpsons Bart versus the Space Mutant. The reason why I am comparing the MS-DOS version against Atari ST is because the MS-DOS version coincides the most with the Atari ST. So instead of comparing MS-DOS with Amiga or with the NES like I should be, I'm going to be doing it for the Atari ST instead. So basically the MS-DOS is just a clone of the Amiga, so if you're interested in seeing the major differences between the NES versus MS-DOS, go watch NES versus Amiga for more detailed info. This video will only be pointing out the slight changes between the Atari ST and the MS-DOS version, so I hope you enjoy. Right from the get-go, if you try and look up the MS-DOS version in the Wikipedia, it actually won't even show it to you. I have no idea why. Maybe they just failed to put it there. So you will see that it'll say Europe, September 1991. I'm just gonna easily assume that the MS-DOS, ST, and Amiga were released within the exact same time frame. So there's that. Right from the get-go, the MS-DOS has the moving aliens, unlike the Atari ST. It only features one song, and you will be hearing it throughout the entire video, but you'll be glad that I'll actually end up turning down the sound even more than all the rest of them because of how horrible it actually is. So right as we get going, the MS-DOS actually features movable conveyor belts and actually showing you what it is that the aliens are talking about. It is a lot more colorful and darker for whatever reason, but lo and behold, I did mess up. I thought the MS-DOS was actually slower than the Atari ST, but in actuality it's not at that slow. So it's basically Amiga, which runs at full speed, MS-DOS, which runs a little bit slower than the Amiga, and then the Atari ST running the slowest. But right here in the start, when it comes to Moe's dialogue, actually Moe in the MS-DOS features 4 different dialogues depending on, I guess, when the game starts. So it features actually Jockstrap, Isabel Ringing, Stupididiot, and Homer S. I actually ended up censoring the word after S because it might be offensive to a lot of you. So if you're interested in seeing what the Homer S is, you might actually have to play the game yourself. But, you know, they both have Moe coming out the doors. No cutscene right from the start, so it just goes directly to the TV. While editing, I actually got very confused at the beginning, like the first 2 levels, trying to see which one was which, because I kept forgetting, just because as you can tell, the MS-DOS and Atari ST, and again the Amiga, just look super similar to each other that I got very confused. But again, the reason why I'm comparing the MS-DOS with the Atari is because it features basically the same thing that the Amiga one doesn't have. So instead of having to continuously speed and slow down the footage, comparing it with the Atari ST would have been easier for me. So as you can tell, the exact same colors when it comes to the X-ray. I just noted that the X-ray actually X-rays the entire thing in the MS-DOS versus the Atari ST, where the UI stays clear, which is kind of funny. I did again end up speeding up and slowing down both the Atari and MS so they can both be at the exact same speed as each other. But Atari ST does in fact run way slower than the MS-DOS, so it was a little bit hard to keep everything together. So there you can tell when it comes to the UI where the UI for MS actually goes the same color as the rest of the game versus Atari that it doesn't. But there isn't really much to say, so I'll probably end up BSing my entire way through when it comes to this version, just because everything is basically the same. Again, no test sound for either of the two versions. I was just showing you that the E actually still contained the 1-up. And this is the reason why I was hesitant comparing Amiga, Atari ST, and MS-DOS with the NES, because they all look the exact same thing, they just play slightly slower. Also, I did not check the checkpoints for the MS-DOS, so the checkpoints that you'll see be popped up as the game goes by, I actually just assume that they're there. So if you're interested in teaching me that I am in fact wrong, you might want to play the game yourself, figure out where the checkpoints are, and call me out on them if you wish. But other than that, because the game looks exactly the same, I just pretty much ignored it. I also ended up removing the loads from the Atari ST to speed things up, because the MS-DOS does not feature any loads at all. It actually continuously plays the way it should be. So there's also that. This level actually has the most changes between the Atari and the Amiga when it comes to the MS-DOS. So if you actually look at the bouncing wheels that come out, only one of them comes out versus 2 wheels that come out into the Atari ST. If you pay a little bit close attention, like Atari ST right there has 2 wheels coming at Bart, and if you look on the right side MS-DOS, you'll see only 1 wheel. Not really sure why they ended up deciding removing 1 wheel. Also, if you look at the platform that Bart is currently standing at, it like goes a little bit lighter or translucent versus MS-DOS that stays exactly the same color. Also, the hats, as you can tell from the start when it comes to the MS-DOS, where they were glitching a little. Like they would move on their own or shoot straight up, further up than it should, which is kind of funny. You can actually instantly kill these bosses if you happen to continuously bounce on their head. So instead of the game just flinging you, the game actually just sort of doesn't, and you can stay on top of their heads, which is pretty neat. So when it comes to the mini bosses that you'll eventually see coming up, there's actually invisible walls where it won't let Bart jump for whatever reason. That doesn't feature in any of the other 2 versions that I've been mentioning thus far. So here you'll see Bart trying to jump, but he just can't hit the walking shoe whatsoever. Not really sure why those invisible walls right above Bart are there for, but they're there in more than just one location. So here I'm showing you that I can't jump at all. Not really sure why they decided to do that. It's a little bit weird. I believe it only features it for the giant shoe and the final mini boss in the magic level, so level 3. But hopefully, as I say absolutely nothing, you can hear how horrible the music is. It just features a giant loud screech. Not really sure why they ended up deciding to go with that, but that's what they did. That being said, you will also see a correction when it comes to my personal ranking at the very end. I will mention again where I actually ended up moving the Atari ST lower in the ranking field and the MS-DOS higher, because again, I thought that the MS-DOS moved slower, but it doesn't. I just got them confused, which is, I mean, let's be honest. Normal, I wasn't really expecting that to happen, but because it did, I ended up looking like an idiot. But yeah, for whatever reason, the Atari ST just plays extremely slowly. And obviously, as you can tell when the MS-DOS, you can actually, the screen actually goes the entirety of the UI versus Atari, where it just sort of stops. So hopefully you can start seeing the very few similarities that both the Atari and MS have versus the Amiga. So it has, it'll have like the moving Ferris wheel in the circus, and don't know what else. I cannot remember what else, but MS definitely resembled the Atari way more than the Amiga. I just sound like an idiot, to be honest, because I can't remember. All three of these versions look exactly the same, so it's just the very minor differences is a little bit crazy to just keep everything together. So moving on to level 3, which is the circus. Playing some mini games. Great gameplay. Tried my best not to die, and I end up dying. Obviously, the balloon minigame actually counts towards your goals, but as you can tell, there's really no reason for the goals to even be there, since you can just glitch through the entire thing. So the Atari ST obviously has the winning prize when it comes to jumping. Same thing for the MS-DOS, so this is another thing that's similar to the Atari and not the Amiga, where the Amiga one does not have the ability to go up these things. You still gain 3 coins from winning. No Jebediah head from either of the two. You reach into the dizzy door. Both of the versions where you can't skip the dizzy door, you have to complete it. But the cool thing here is that the MS-DOS does not feature any text. It just features timer. But, you know, in order to solve it, it's the exact same thing. You also win 9 balloons, and the doors close as soon as you collect them, or go away as soon as you don't pick them up. Here's another slight change, is if you end up trying to hop on the little platform over to the far left at the bottom, you'll end up going right through it and go back down. When I was first trying to record, I kept thinking that I wasn't reaching that little platform, because when you transition, you actually end up like slowing down in some form. So I kept thinking that I wasn't going fast enough, but ended up remembering that you actually end up going right through it, so you have to just jump straight up on top of the second one. So again, the moving Ferris wheel that the Amiga one does not have. And now we reach Sideshow Bob once again. I believe the Atari ST is the one where you can go right through the right side, where MS-DOS you cannot. You have to fight inside of the field. Also, the blinking seems to be slower when it comes to the MS-DOS. It's either that or the blinking is just more random, not really sure, but I do notice that the characters on the bottom left, like currently Lisa, just ends up having her eyes closed a lot more often. So moving on to the museum. Both the circus, museum, and nuclear plant. Well, not the circus, but the museum and the nuclear plant featured no changes. I was gonna say the same thing for the circus, but might be? I can't even remember. It doesn't matter. Moving on. Obviously, the Amiga, the MS-DOS and Atari do not have the wrong warps that the Amiga one does have, which is a little strange, which is why I'm saying it features, again, the most when it comes to the Atari ST. I just find it funny how the changes that they ended up deciding to go with, or maybe accidentally putting them in there, are a little bit strange, but nonetheless, the point of these videos is, again, to just show you the differences. So again, no enemy, no ant, or I would say ant, but it's probably a spider right next to the gators. So just seeing them side by side, you can just tell how close each other is to each game. Like it's super hard to pinpoint the differences if you're not actually playing them on the console. But again, instead of showing it versus the NES, you can tell the difference, that there pretty much is no difference. It's just it was released on a different console, but, or in this case, in a different PC, but no actual changes that matter. That being said, the last three are going to be also really good videos that don't feature the exact same looking things, because they all have their little minor differences and the minor glitches or visual effects or whatever that will be actually visually pleasing to see, versus Atari ST, MS-DOS, and Amiga that all look the same after just watching the NES versus Amiga. Which I am very excited to finally reach the last three remaining videos. I believe you couldn't stand on that invisible ground for the MS-DOS. Not really sure why the Atari one has it, but hey. So yeah, the final three ones are going to be the Sega Genesis, Sega Master System, and Sega Game Gear. Even though they're all Sega, the Master System is sort of its own game, and the Game Gear just looks the most when it comes to comparing it to the Sega Master System. But I'll see how I end up deciding making those videos, or if I'll just end up making them look kind of like these, where I'm comparing each Sega game with each other versus the NES. But regardless, for now, exact same movements, exact same everything. The location of these honks are in the exact same spot, in the exact same amount, which is, I want to say 7. Spiders still only move to the right. I believe I die here on the MS-DOS. No, the Atari one maybe. So the two cats that pounce. Yep, there I go. Mummy boss. 1, 2, 3. Off we go. Quick shovel checkpoint. They're both done when it comes to Homer, which is nice. Point value for MS-DOS is definitely way higher. Oh, here we go. Here's another slight change. The lava flow actually flows for the MS-DOS versus the Atari, and you can see the color that the Atari one also has, but very slightly in the MS-DOS as it moves, so that's pretty cool, right? Also, there are enemies in the Atari ST versus the MS-DOS that there are none of. Not really sure why they ended up deciding having a lava flow, but no enemy locations when it comes to this oil section. Now we have the dino balls. Same thing, you can just stay on the top, but the MS-DOS cannot go further right like the Atari one can, so you actually have to, you actually won't shoot inside or through the boss. You can just continuously do the boss like normal, just jump up there, nothing bad will happen. Finally reaching the final boss of the game. Hit him 3 times, down he goes. Final boss, because obviously the nuclear plant does not feature a boss, although it would have made a lot more sense if they had Homer's boss as the final boss, but nope. I also like how much faster the conveyor belts seem to move. So they both have the exact same map. Nothing about it is different. So the despawn mutant, there, you'll see him as soon as we go left. See, now there's 2 on each side. Not really sure why that mutant is despawned to begin with. It might be because of Marge as she walks by, not really sure. Just go right through the nuclear doors. I also want to say that the spawn locations for when you die should all be in the exact same spot, but I was not going to test that. A slight change is if you pay attention to both the far left and the far right for the Atari ST, you'll notice that the camera actually pans further than the MS-DOS one does. Like, and the MS-DOS just cuts the camera and the building just stops at the wall versus the Atari one that you'll see beyond the wall. Not really sure why they ended up continuing to show more beyond the walls of the nuclear plant when it comes to both the Amiga and Atari ST, but at least the MS-DOS actually got that right. So as you can tell, if you weren't actually, again, if I didn't mention what version I was playing, you most likely would not be able to point out which version is which, just because of how stupidly close they are to each other. Which is kind of funny because thus far every single version has actually looked different, but in this case MS-DOS is just paused for whatever reason. In this case, they just, all 3 versions look exactly the same, and that was a little disappointing when it actually came to speedrunning the games, because it was like, well, kind of wish they weren't like that, but you know. it's just interesting how they ended up deciding these things. Also, no idea why it's not in the wiki. When I was actually looking them all up, again, I only counted the 9, including the NES, and then my brother actually ended up mentioning that it also included the MS-DOS, and I was double checking to see if the MS-DOS wasn't just a like a home version of the game that, you know, a person that just ended up making and releasing to it also be played on the MS-DOS, but from what I've found, it actually ended up being official, obviously. So, not really sure why people have left out the MS-DOS version of this game, but regardless, we are seeing it now. And that music, like, while I actually end up speedrunning the game, I had to lower down the sound for the MS-DOS just because of how loud and screechy it was. Like, it's messed up. I don't really know what it is that developers were thinking, considering they've all been the same thus far, as to why they ended up deciding to go with what they went, but, you know. Again, not really much more to say, so I'm going to go ahead and mention the last 3. When it comes to the 3 Sega games, my favorite one would be the Genesis because it moves the fastest, and then the next one would be the Master System because it actually looks nice. So even though they're both Sega, I don't really know how the Master System relates to the Genesis besides, like, graphic-wise when it came to showing background or music, but the Sega Game Gear actually follows the Master System way more than it does with the Genesis, so I'll most likely end up doing Genesis versus Sega Master System versus Sega Game Gear, and then do NES and Genesis. But as far as Genesis and Master System, not really sure how I'll end up doing that. But regardless, the last 3 videos are actually going to be rather interesting to watch because one of them features a unique glitch that you haven't seen thus far. And again, they'll all look different, nothing like the Atari or MS-DOS, so that'll also be really nice to pay attention to. Hopefully you guys have been enjoying the series thus far. I know I've been enjoying it. When it came to speedrunning it, like, for sure, I think all the Sega games were right next to each other just because they all pretty much play the same. But obviously I'll give you more detail when those videos come out, which is again the reason why Atari and MS were released. I would want to say rather quickly is because they all pretty much played exactly like the Amiga, and all I needed to do was find out the very minor changes that you are clearly probably not seeing just because they look exactly the same, but I promise that they're both different. The final 4 nuclear rods. Also, one final change you'll see at the very end I'll mention as soon as it actually happens. Obviously, the MS-DOS does not have the going ahead of the camera, kind of like the Atari one uses in order to despawn some enemies, which is pretty interesting. Also, pay attention to my lives. I have 1 hit left, and the final life counter would be 1, so I only have the 1 extra life thus far. If I take damage, I already have 1 remaining life, and I think I end up taking a hit here as well, counting me down to my final hit. So if I was not able to use save states when it came to playing the MS-DOS, which is basically the only reason why I didn't bother trying to look for the locations of all of the checkpoints. So if I ended up dying here, I would end up having to replay the entire game just to get recording of the final level. Thankfully that didn't happen, but it was very scary running around with only 1 extra life, and then as you can see, only 1 extra hit, 1 final hit before the final life to mess around with the game. Unlike the Atari, again, because the Atari of how slow it moves, it just made it super easy to get control of Bart. So the physics for the MS-DOS are actually pretty good. Obviously slightly slower than the Amiga, but I want to say because it's slightly slower, it's slightly harder to get the timing for when to do what. But obviously playing it just for a few tries or whatever, you'll get used to it, but playing it just the one time to get footage was rather unpleasant, just for the fact that, you know, you don't want to end up dying and trying to get the footage as quickly as possible. So finally we're down to our final power rod. Atari ST finally getting there versus the MS-DOS that's already heading to the location. So here, if I end up dying, I'll actually have to replay the entire game again, so I'm just playing like stupid careful. There's Maggie also in door 4 on the very far left. So there you can just tell how much slower the Atari ST, but I don't remember if I had to either speed up or slow down the Atari ST to measure what the MS-DOS was currently doing. But regardless, finally handing in the final power rod. So obviously the goals hit 0, but nothing happens. You actually have to go through the elevator and down. And as you can tell, for whatever reason, the table is gone. Not really sure why it's like that, but both ending basically in the exact same way with the family at the very end. And then when the final cutscene finally shows up, that Simpson boy has defeated us. We have failed dismally. You have to admire the boy's courage and luck. Again, no luck here involved. We must honor our foe. I have an idea, sir. And then if you pay attention, obviously, Bart J. Simpson, intergalactic space hero, but no sunglasses for MS-DOS versus Atari and Amiga that do feature sunglasses. Not only that, but they also took away the the text from his face and put it under. And there is the personal rankings where MS-DOS is actually higher than the Atari ST. With that, hope you guys had fun. I know I did. Having a ton of blast actually making these videos for you. So we're finally down to our final 3. Sega Game Gear will be the final 9th video. The Sega Genesis will be the next one, which will be the 7th, and the Sega Master System will be the 8th. Most likely comparing Sega Genesis with Master System and Master System with Game Gear, and the obviously the Genesis with the NES. But with that, hope you guys have enjoyed thus far. Hopefully I'll have the next video released sometime at the end of either next week or Monday of the following. But hope you guys been enjoying, and take care.